Hello. Photography has, in its nearly bicentennial history, experienced a meteoric rise from relative obscurity as a pastime practiced by wealthy and aristocratic inventors, scientists, and artisans to one of the most ubiquitous forms of modern visual imagery. The rapid development and popularization of digital imaging technologies in the last few decades has furthered the medium's entrenchment in all facets of modern societies and cultures, facilitating its permeation throughout the arts, industry, commerce, and communication. As John Berger notes, photography has become a habitual and an unexamined part of modern perception and a quintessential modern way of looking. As a civilization now accustomed to thinking in images, as John Tagg describes, many of photography's technical and stylistic qualities have become deeply ingrained in modern visual language, and the indexical qualities of photographic realism have become naturalized in our modern perceptions. In the last few years alone, emerging technologies such as text prompted image generating artificial intelligence prove how essential photographic media and images are to modern visual culture. But nowhere is this more obvious, perhaps, than in contemporary video gaming. From the mid 2010s onwards, video game developers have released games with tools called photo mode, a type of extra diegetic image making mode that allows players to make or take photographs of in game environments and events. The functions and uses of these photographs vary from creative expression to documentation, but all are based on the player's own experiences of the game world and events therein. Combined with social media platforms and image sharing forums such as Instagram, Reddit, Twitter, and Flickr, a new photographic genre called in-game photography or virtual photography has flourished as more games have emulated photography in virtual space. Yet photo modes are only one way that video games emulate photographic techniques to enhance a sense of reality and deepen player immersion. Other games use in-game photographic equipment and objects, including photographs, albums, and even fully simulated darkrooms, as interdiegetic gameplay mechanics and narrative devices. So culturally reluctant are we to abandon photographic techniques and technologies and aesthetics that game developers have found ways to bring photographies into the virtual. While there are no definitive lists, one source has compiled a catalog of 444 video games that include either a photo mode or an in-game camera. In-game photography as a hybrid photographic practice reveals several things. Firstly, that photographic realism as a visual language is highly fluid and ambiguous, with applications and uses well beyond the medium specificity of traditional analog photography. Secondly, that intention and context matters. There is no subterfuge or attempt at obfuscating the origins of the resulting photographs. These are photographs intentionally made to be viewed and conceived of as such, albeit hybrid ones. By harnessing the technical and stylistic qualities of analog photography and photographic realism, including lens flare, glare, focal length, depth of field, filters, and film grain, along with photographic genre and subject matters, in-game photography extends the photographic image and its representational into the virtual. Regardless of the technical execution or the practice, each remediation of photography in a video game allows players and photographers, amateurs and professionals alike, to explore increasingly graphically complex and aesthetically interesting and deeply immersive worlds using familiar tools and techniques. My question is, can technical and cultural remediations of photographies in video games shed light on our interactions with physical space? Can the ways we interact with virtual environments using photographies allow us to reflect on how we engage with the medium itself? I first became interested in these questions in 2015. I had just returned home from hiking in a nature reserve in the outskirts of Edinburgh, Scotland. Fleeing a downpour in the middle of a heather moorfield, I was finally safe and warm in the comfort of my bed and decided to boot up the game The Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt. I was immediately captivated by the game world and how the blustery, rain-addled forest of the game mirrored my own physical surroundings pretty well. Of the many details that caught my attention while wandering around were the many footpaths that dissected the virtual landscape, each tempting me towards new, untold discoveries. This didn't seem too different from the ones I'd just trekked, covered as they were with nature's debris and littered with branches on top of roots and undergrowth. In that minute, there was an uncanny intersection that piqued my curiosity between the experience I just had outdoors and the one I was currently experiencing virtually. Upon its release, The Witcher 3 was widely lauded by the gaming community and journalists for its immersive photorealistic environments and how accurate and authentic the virtual spaces felt. The visual design and spatial architecture are certainly authentic, yet mix references from Slavic, Celtic, and Scandinavian cultures, with the major port city of Novigrad drawing inspiration from many periods of Eastern European, specifically Polish, architecture. Likewise, the natural landscape of Skellig, a small island nation in the northernmost reaches, mirrored the coniferous evergreen forests found throughout Nordic countries. The effect, according to landscape designer Rob Dwyer, is such that the mountains look geologically convincing, the woods naturally dense, and I quote, everything down to the smallest detail of the design give them an extra quality, they become believable places. By combining real-world references and real-world spatial design with the almost limitless potential for virtual, free exploration in virtual places, The Witcher 3 creates a fantastical world that remains rooted in physical reality, a place that is filled with many mysteries and monsters, but familiar as well. While fast-paced, adventure-filled, open-world games like Witcher 3 reward players for exploring the world, other games called walking simulators use walking as a storytelling device in combination with embedded narrative sequences and environmental storytelling. The impact of walking simulators in game design generally is not to be underestimated, as the influence of the slower pace and contemplative movement fostered by these games can be found in the design of others, including The Witcher 3. As Cameron Kunzelman notes, and I quote, "The willingness to strip a player down to their experience of a space and to ask them to sit down with how they exist in that digital zone for a few moments is a radical pause. These games ask players to look at the world not as a set of challenges, and instead as a thing to be explored and appreciate for its own sake. They ask one to do less and experience more." Released in the same year as The Witcher 3, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture is among the most memorable and successful walking simulators as a wonderful evocation of rural England during the 1980s. The game uses highly specific landscape and spatial design with landscape features such as styles to lead the player through the environment and through the narrative, while also evoking how we navigate and traverse physical land. As a structure intended to provide access while limiting animal and wildlife mobility, the style is a combination of steps, ladders, and narrow gaps built to cross fences, walls, and edges. It is almost idiosyncratic to the United Kingdom and can be found throughout its landscapes as part of the Rights of Way, a legal right which codifies traditional non-motorized access outdoors on land and water. Like the right to roam found in many Nordic countries, the Rights of Way guarantees that people traveling by foot have public access rights to and between cultivated and uncultivated lands. Styles today are, however, becoming a relic of a bygone era, as they're being replaced by more accessible methods such as gates or being removed altogether. But in the contemplative exploration of the virtual version of the West Midlands around the fictional town of Yotten, you have the time to appreciate the minutiae of the environment, from the signs and the signages and the styles, to the wind moving through the trees, to the still environment of the abandoned rural town, and to the few birds, bees, and crickets that remain behind. As a reaction to these curious intersections that I experienced while engaging with physical and virtual environments, I began an artistic experimentation to explore the boundaries between photographies and video games, and to question the dominant understanding of photographies as a transparent and accurate visual rendering of reality. The resulting body of work, titled Virtual Lands, intentionally appropriates and remediates formal and stylistic qualities of photorealistic video game graphics using photographic technologies and techniques. My aim is to create photographic hybrids that look like still images of video games, but using traditional and digital photographic methods. I initially considered portraiture, but found the results lacking. Despite there being potential in picturing the intersection between people and avatars, or virtual bodies that players use to interact in virtual worlds, other artists were already exploring this idea. I soon came back to landscape photography, a practice that I was already familiar with. As a photographic practice, landscape has a long-held tradition with aesthetic conventions stemming from the 15th century, when it was primarily used to signify wealth or as a backdrop or scenery. In the 18th century, landscape was ushered in as a subject and an aesthetic category, with garden landscapes introducing the notion of a contemplative view. More recently, however, artists such as Richard Long and Ed Ruscha have interrogated landscapes as constructs and explored the notion of landscape as an interactive place and an experiential site, allowing for the engagement with economic, cultural, and historical values using photographies as their medium. One key notion that emerged in analyzing landscape photography was how essential walking is to the practice. This too became apparent the more I analyzed how video games and virtual environments are made to be navigated. Photographically, walking remains the primary way for photographers working outdoors to reach their subjects, and in video games, walking is the primary method for players to reach different locations throughout the virtual environments. Photographically, this practice is rooted in generations of artists walking and wandering through lands, sketching along the way. 19th century painters, for example, such as Caspar David Friedrich and Varanar Holmberg, would later combine these sketches and create composite landscape paintings that fluctuate between visual coherence and spatial confusion, using comprehensive spatial detailing landscape features to create compositionally three-dimensional space. Later generations of artists, including Richard Long, have made the walk itself the core of their creative methodology and the conceptual basis of their work. While walking is a utilitarian act and a recreational necessity for your well-being, as an intentional part of a creative or artistic image-making practice, it changes from a daily requirement to a reflective and performative act. In this mode, walking requires a sensitivity, awareness, and an appreciation of the location itself. Whether it's following basic tenets of good hiking etiquette or an awareness of the spiritual, historical, cultural, and economic relationships that human beings have within an environment and its non-human inhabitants. Walking with intention becomes a way to engage and interact with the world, and, I quote, providing the means for exposing oneself to new, changing perceptions and experiences, and of acquiring an expanded awareness of our surroundings. Through such experiences and through a deeper understanding of the places we occupy, we acquire a better understanding of our position in the world. Combined with photographic practice, itself a performative gesture according to David Green and Joanna Lowry, walking becomes a photographic reality unto itself, allowing the walker photographer to look, see, and experience things with greater awareness of the ordinary minutiae and the idiosyncratic details of any landscape. Examples of this can be found throughout contemporary art and media. In a 2019 study, researchers found that players had learned how to correctly identify several species of flora and fauna from North American ecosystems after playing Red Dead Redemption 2. While the participant pool was limited, these findings do provide some insight into how player immersion in virtual environments rich with wildlife can provoke greater understanding and appreciation for the physical natural world. In this environment, players found time, space, and safety to follow local wildlife inhabiting the virtual environment and learned of their physical traits and their behavioral patterns in physical reality. Combined with the Kodak Brownie camera that players can use throughout their gameplay, Red Dead Redemption 2 shows how the technical and cultural practice of photography in video games can give greater meaning and relevance to the medium, but also to our engagement with our physical and virtual realities. In a similar fashion, Ed Ruscha's photographic books, including Every Building on the Sunset Strip, explore the familiar yet changing landscape of Los Angeles and reflect the changing perceptions and conceptions of landscape. Although using cars as his method of transportation rather than walking, his typological and performative approach creates a repetition of seemingly neutral appearances, each gradually revealing the inexorable similarities of places that serve similar functions, including gasoline stations, parking lots, and swimming pools. This repetition also reveals subtle differences and the idiosyncratic details. Spending extended amounts of time with these books in the same way you would spend hours scrambling through a forest trying to identify a deer strips away the appearance of a detached or disinterested observer. Instead, you find an embodied and personal engagement with an environment that may be undergoing rapid development. Walking, both in the case of Red Dead Redemption 2 and Ed Ruscha's books, celebrate the beauty and the extraordinary of the ordinary and the mundane. While choosing which feature to highlight, I first explored trees as the central subject. This, however, severely limited the types of environments and compositions that I could create. After further contemplation and returning to video games, I found a different landscape feature that has carried over from physical reality into virtual ones. Footpaths are somewhat paradoxical constructs. Utterly mundane, they seldom receive the attention they deserve for the critical functions they fulfill. Constructed for pedestrian thoroughfare, they provide access while also guiding and limiting human pedestrian traffic. As with much of our vernacular architecture and spatial design, footpaths and trails are easily overlooked by the many hikers, walkers, runners, and bicyclists who regularly use them. A well-designed footpath is one that seems naturally fitted, as if it's always been there. Yet they are constructed either by humans or local wildlife passing through, and influence how human beings behave and move through landscape, shaping our perceptions and experiences of natural and cultural landscape. Footpaths are, however, part of a larger context, and an essential part of the project has been acknowledging the environment surrounding them. All photographs used for the project's current iterations were made in nature reserves and similarly protected wildlife areas in Scotland and Finland. The first iteration was conducted in Scotland throughout the spring of 2016, primarily in the Scottish Highlands and the Greenbelt area around Edinburgh. The second was conducted in southern Finland throughout the summer of 2019. All the characteristics of the local topography and the features of each landscape became very familiar to me with each subsequent walk. These areas present increasingly rare but vital landscapes and ecosystems. Culturally, Finnish and Scottish landscapes are idealized and even mythologized as untouched and true ancient wilderness. They are also essential parts of each respective country's national identity, and references can be found in local folklore, poetry, songs, and pre-Christian belief. This notion of untouched or unaltered wilderness is sadly something of a misconception. While it is true that Finland and Scotland have some of the largest wilderness areas and nature reserves in Europe, these are vanishingly small and increasingly difficult to protect from encroachment, exploitation, and urban expansion. The landscapes of both countries that are perceived as wilderness are in fact agricultural or cultivated zones intended for animal husbandry, forestry, and human habitation, which complicates the separation of natural from built environment. Most, if not all, ancient boreal and rainforests have long since been deforested, with small pockets and remnants remaining. At the same time, these are cultures and places where people express a fervent love and appreciation for nature, despite having limited daily contact with it due to urbanized, sedentary lifestyles that increase the physical and perceptual distances between the natural and built environment. In order to remediate the visual and graphical qualities of video games, such as texture mapping of 3D models, artifacting, ambient occlusion, and global illumination, each hybrid photograph was created using digital compositing. This included playing with the perceived depth of the image by blurring different sections of the foreground, midground, and background to emulate how game engines gradually render objects and geography. Consisting of 7 exposures, I used Adobe Photoshop to generate a high dynamic range image. The file was then post-processed using layers of Gaussian blur and the color grading in Photoshop to achieve the final intended effect. By appropriating video game aesthetics and merging it with photographic techniques, I attempt to play with and subvert viewers' expectations of the photographic image and how it functions visually. Artists have long played with these kinds of ideas, including Thomas Ruff, who uses found imagery and photographic archive material to reframe the materiality and the formal qualities of photographic images to critique aesthetic conventions, genre, and motifs of transparent realism and the history of photography. In this way, Ruff's work asks us to reconsider, as Jill Glessing notes, existential questions about the presentation, mobility, and meaning of this frighteningly omnipresent medium. Ruff's works embody the inherited histories of the medium and its countless discourses, with the medium becoming his subject rather than what is pictured. For me, the final step with virtual lands, however, in completing this remediation between analog and digital materialities of hybrid photography, was producing them as material and physical objects and presenting them publicly. To date, Virtual Lands has been exhibited in Scotland, Finland, France, and the Netherlands, both as physical photographic prints and as screen-based digital art befitting its hybrid nature. As a blend, if you have to categorize it, of game art and conceptual photography, the resulting hybrid landscapes demonstrate how the traditions of analog media and art coexist with new ones through processes of emulation, remediation, and incorporation. My appropriation of existing tools and conventions for new purposes, and by reinterpreting old and new media together, I try to show how photography is no more an obsolescent media, but one that has become re-engaged and re-immersed in a new reality. As I hope I have shown, photography is alive and well. Slightly changed, yes, but not radically. In fact, the practice of photography and its remediation in video games refutes many of the fears that critics such as W.J.T. Mitchell voiced about the potential effects of digital imaging technologies on photography. Mitchell argues that digital technologies would, and I quote, relentlessly destabilize old photographic technology and disrupt familiar practices of image production and exchange. Mitchell was not alone in his fears, with Fred Richen taking a more moderate approach, yet foreseeing a similar rupture from photography as before. One major point of concern for both was the ease with which they saw that photographs could be manipulated by digital technologies. Most of these fears, however, stem from a misunderstanding and a generalization of the plurality of photographic technologies and their histories. Jeffrey Batchen, for example, notes that the histories of photography are a history of intentional and purposeful interventions, alterations, and manipulations of photographs and the realities they represent. Long before the viewer's perspective shapes a photograph, the image is already formed through the subjective and creative decisions of the image maker. All photographic images construct, alter, reconstruct, and reinterpret reality in one way or another. Even now, artists such as Jeff Wall use digital compositing as a core tool not to undermine the veracity or authenticity of photography, but to confront us with the intangible influence that art and photographic histories have in shaping our perceptions. By combining the materialities and visual languages of art, history, and commercial photography, Wall bridges past and present visual culture to communicate on the effects of modernity on how we perceive and represent reality using technology. By pinning his arguments on perceived ontological differences between photography's analog and digital forms, Mitchell's theory ignores the inherent complexities and multiplicities of photographies. In reality, as Lev Manovich argues, and I hope I have shown throughout this presentation, these distinctions do not matter in practice. In their uses and functions, digital photographs are like analog photographs, even if their methods of production and dissemination are technologically different. Likewise, Martin Lister argues that digital technologies have not led to the obsolescence of photography, but rather the development of immersive and interactive digital technologies such as video games allow us to recover and rediscover photographies that have been forgotten. Rather than a poverty of photographies, there is an overabundance, each with specific functions, uses, and contexts. This, however, does require a willingness and ability to look beyond the medium-specific practice and discourse of photography into its messy realities, so that we can gain greater understanding of what Lister refers to as the economic and cultural investiture that modern cultures have in photography, as well as the meaning, significance, intention, and context of individual photographs. Rather than taking us beyond the boundaries of the real world, as Mitchell fears, I argue that digital images take us beyond the conventions of normal or straight photography. Instead of faking reality, computer graphics, especially in video games, attempt to fake photographic realism. The reason they succeed in doing so is, as Manovich states, because we have accepted the image of photographs as reality. Hybrid photographs are not inferior representations of our physical reality, but realistic representations of a different hybrid one. Virtual Lands is an ongoing project and is now in its third iteration. As the project progresses, I hope to produce more qualitative research, including in-depth viewer interviews. As of now, the first informal responses I have received have been promising. The intentional ambiguity has caused some confusion in some viewers, specifically those with little experience or knowledge of video games, while others who do express a clearer understanding of the project's intentions and the content. And some are just interested in the real-world locations that I have photographed. My work with the project has, however, provided some crucial observations that I would like to share as a conclusion. Firstly, traditional film photography is re-emerging and remains relevant. Kodak and Fuji have both reopened production lines to meet consumer demands for film stock. And one of Europe's largest second-hand retailers of analog photographic equipment has just received a €2 million investment. But for digital and analog media and art to coexist and even thrive in our current media landscape, there is a pressing need to help people on all levels of society to develop better skills in visual and media literacy and to improve critical thinking skills, especially in photographic imagery. We can no longer afford any naivety when it comes to the purpose and intention of these images, particularly those that use the stylistic and technical qualities of photographs. Secondly, we need to care for our physical environments, both natural and built. As virtual environments continue to develop and become increasingly sophisticated and immersive, we still remain physical beings, and we still have a physical presence in physical reality. In my hometown, I have seen old coniferous taiga forests give way to younger leafy trees due to the rapid warming of the Finnish climate, as well as due to urban development. Likewise, in Scotland, ancient forests crucial for the native biodiversity are far and few in between due to deforestation. While these are events no single individual can stop, just caring about your local environment makes a difference. So I urge you, if you can, to grab a camera, go out for a walk, and wander and enjoy the outdoors. Wander about your surroundings, walk with intention, take in the extraordinary of the ordinary, and have a lovely day. Thank you.